They were the masters of Iron Age Europe. Their leaders were men and women of legend, King Arthur of the Britons, the warrior queen Boudica, and Vercingetorix the Gaul. They had powerful priests called druids who practiced human sacrifice to their gods. They were bloodthirsty headhunters who fought naked in battle against spears and armor. But it all ended in tragedy. Their vibrant culture was wiped out of Europe. They were driven to the Atlantic fringes by the legions of Rome. They became the eternal victims, the romantic underdogs of history. Yet, 2,000 years later, their character still casts a spell. They were the people we call the Celts. But how much is myth and how much is true? I'm Richard Rudgley, and I've made it my business to delve into our history, to try to find out what makes us who we are today. Previously, I've travelled back to the Stone Age and discovered that we were just as clever then as we are now. And I've explored the Dark Ages and found that our pagan ancestors were not primitive savages. Now I want to add another piece to our historical puzzle. I want to explore that elusive part of our past that we call Celtic. I'm on a journey to uncover the ancient Celts, to bring them out into the light after 2,000 years of myth-making. I found the earliest known Celtic town, not in the British Isles, but in Germany. And I followed the Celts on their journey through history. At Elysia in France, I stood on the spot where Vercingetorix the Gaul was conquered by Julius Caesar. His defeat marked the end of the Celtic world. Or did it? Today in Britain and Ireland, many people think they're the descendants of this race of ancient Celts, the last remnants of an ethnic group pushed to the margins of Europe as the Romans advanced. But does the evidence support this? My first problem is, the Romans never called the people of Britain Celts, although they did say that the ancient Britons spoke a similar language to the Celts of Gaul. What about in Scotland, a nation we think of as Celtic today? I've come north to the Shetland Islands to explore one of the largest and most mysterious monuments of Iron Age Britain. It looks like a modern cooling tower, but this is an ancient broch. The ruins of more than 500 survive in Scotland today. They're the most dramatic evidence left by the people who lived here in the Iron Age. Musa Broch is the only one still intact.
This is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the best broch in the world. And in our Shetland Islands, this is the equivalent of the Great Wall of China. This is our most stupendous archaeological monument.
This amazing stone tower is over 40 feet high and built without an ounce of mortar.
This is a dry stone building. It stood here for 2,000 years. You can imagine the gales that have afflicted it during that period.
So what was the purpose of the broch then?
For the past 25 years, archaeologists have imagined that these buildings were farmhouses. I don't believe a word of it. This is a fortification.
Oh wow, look at this. It's even more impressive from inside, isn't it, than out?
Yeah.
Wow.
They've had its own timber furnishings. It wouldn't have looked bare and unfinished in the way that it does today.
It's only when you get to the top of the stairs that you realise what the building was for.
You can imagine how commanding this building would have looked to anybody who was arriving from offshore.
Absolutely. They must have had a great view. They could survey the whole area. They could see attackers coming from a long way off, prepare themselves.
Yeah.
And they certainly left their mark.
They are by far the biggest things that were built here until the 20th century.
The Brochs were built long before the Romans defeated the Celts in Europe. Were they built by Celtic migrants to Scotland?
It looks to me as if the people who built these things were an Iron Age people, presumably a Celtic people, who made their presence felt in a big way in the north of Scotland. Whether they called themselves Celts, of course, is an entirely different matter.
This in itself is a real feat, but when you add on all the hundreds of others, you realise that some big cultural constructions going on here. Someone's building themselves a culture, and a very enduring one at that.
But were the Broch builders Celts? Brochs only exist in the north of Scotland, and there is nothing on the continent remotely like them. Surprisingly, the evidence from England, like the Battersea Shield and the Wetwang chariots, seems more Celtic than Scotland. In fact, there's no evidence in Scotland at all to suggest waves of Celtic migrants from Europe settled there in large numbers. So what about Wales? There's plenty of archaeology in Wales that enables us to reconstruct what daily life would have been like in the Iron Age for ordinary people. It should be possible to see if there are anything in common between Celtic culture and the culture of Britain BC. Castle Henlith is an Iron Age hill fort, and these roundhouses have been rebuilt on their ancient foundations.
These are attempts to reconstruct what was here originally. The most important thing about that to me is that when you go into them, you get a sense of place, a sense of sharing space with the people who lived there before.
This is as close as you can get to life as it was lived in Iron Age Britain in the centuries before the Romans.
Don't try and mess around with it too much, otherwise it'll just fall off. To build a roundhouse like this, you need lots and lots of resources. So the person who lived up here would be an important person, locally important.
Now, I'm going to give him the blessing of one of our gods before he goes into battle, and he is going to be blessed by Tyrannus, the god of thunder. Right, and
there are plenty of echoes here of the way European Celtic society was structured. Tribal groups, each with their own local identity, living in hill forts and fighting each other. Just like their continental cousins, they had formidable defences.
We call those a chevaux de frise. And basically, it's a series of small stones that are set up on end, almost like a sort of Iron Age tank trap.
I mean, a horse wouldn't want to come through here, would it?
No.
Not at all.
Well, you wouldn't want to run through here either.
If you did manage it, you'd get another nasty surprise. A slingshot hoard was found by the main gate.
Sling stones. Every man's weapons. These are found by the thousand on hill forts. Here, there was over 2,000 in one cache.
Just like in Celtic Europe, the people here were warriors.
A hole-in-one.
There it goes. Well done.
But they were also farmers, just like in Gaul, and they were using new iron tools, ones that we still use today.
So really the Iron Age was an industrial revolution in a sense.
Very much so. Once you start to produce tools exactly for the job, the styles don't change. We've got a couple of examples here, for instance. It's a digging tool for cultivating ground, preparing seed beds. Harvest tools, for instance, everybody recognises that one, sickle. The tool shape is identical, right the way for now 2,500 years.
They grew wheat, barley, peas and beans. Farming became more efficient because of the new iron tools.
The food production went up enormously to the point we were exporting.
So they were exporting grain to where?
To Gaul, of all places. The Romans were buying it for the Roman Empire.
Trade brought the people of Iron Age Britain into contact with tribes hundreds of miles away, even across the sea in Europe.
So all this effort to reconstruct the past, what has it taught us?
It's taught me that the people who lived here in the Iron Age, sophisticated people, they had high skill levels. far more than most of us have today.
So would you say they were Celts?
I wouldn't know, because I think the person who lived here wouldn't have probably have heard of the word Celt. The Roman sources suggest that the tribe for this area is called Demetai, but there are so many individual forts close together that would suggest that there probably isn't any sort of centralised leadership.
So we're talking about clan-based societies rather than full bloods.
Yeah, I think so.
Is it right to call the people of Britain BC Celts? I haven't found evidence of mass migration of European Celts to Britain, but what I have found in the British Isles is a culture that had very many similarities with the Celtic culture I discovered on the continent. And there's something else that connects Wales to European Celtic culture.
I mean, I feel Celtic as a Welshman, but I don't feel that Celticity can be drawn from the Iron Age necessarily. If you're going to sort of draw any relationship between present-day population of Wales and the Iron Age, you'd say that language is the key.
Today, 2 million people in Britain and Ireland speak a Celtic language. The greatest number are Welsh. If we listen hard, can we hear a distant echo of Britain talking 2,000 years ago? I've come to Aberystwyth to find out if the Welsh language can help me make an even stronger connection between the peoples of the British Isles and the Celts of Europe.
Richard, this is a map showing the Roman period and before tribal names and place names across Europe. There's the Iceni here, Boudica, so yeah. Over here there's Demetai.
And again, Castell-Henllys.
Yeah, Castell-Henllys is there. Up here you've got the Cornovi right in the north. That's a horn of land, and corn means horn in Welsh. Of course, the same corn you get in Cornwall, another horn of land.
Before the Romans, there were many different tribes in Britain, but there was a common language that stretched from the Broch builders of Scotland down to Cornwall.
You've got one language being spoken in slight varieties over the whole of Britain, but it carries on over into France as well. You can see that some of the tribal names actually recur. For example, here you've got the Atrebates, they're on your side somewhere.
Yeah.
That's right. Then we've got, up here in Yorkshire, the Parisii.
Okay, this is the wetland territory.
That's right. And exactly the same name as Parisii around Paris. Now, some of these names may be the same without meaning it's the same people. But say Parisii and the ones up here, they were both using chariot burial, so maybe they're actually the same people who migrated.
Celtic languages on the continent died out with the Roman invasion, but there are surviving fragments of ancient Gaulish. Is it possible to compare them with the Welsh language and find a connection?
Now here we've got some words in Gaulish on this side, that is the ancient Celtic language of France. And here we've got some modern Welsh words which correspond, thus to show the connection between the languages. Mat means good or lucky, and mat turns up in later Welsh as mad. There's a slight change, but it's still recognised to be the same. That means lucky. Here's another Gaulish word, catus, that means a battle. Now that turns up as card in modern Welsh.
So with Welsh and with Gaelic and a few other surviving remnants of Celtic languages, do we see the last vestiges of something which was once Europe-wide?
I think we do. We're talking about a language which was spread with slight variations, of course, all the way from Portugal to the Black Sea and even into Turkey. But it's only survived on the Atlantic fringe.
It's astonishing that the people of the British Isles spoke a language that was in use right across Europe. And yet there's little evidence that Celtic tribes migrated to Britain and Ireland from the continent. However, it is clear that the people of the British Isles shared culture and language with the continental Celts. And by that definition, the Iron Age people of Britain and Ireland could be called Celtic. In 43 AD, 100 years after the Romans had crushed the Celtic world on mainland Europe, they invaded Britain. How did the many British tribes react to the impact of the Roman invasion? Did the legions of Rome drive the Celtic tribes of Britain to the Atlantic fringes, where they became the romantic underdogs of history? Roman writings not only tell us that the people of Britain spoke a similar language to the Celts of Gaul, but also that they shared a powerful class of religious leaders unique to the Celtic world, Druids. For the Romans to break the Celts, they first had to break the power of the Druids. Druids were doctors, priests, scientists and philosophers, all rolled into one, and their power lay in the fact that they were the only class of people who transcended tribal barriers.
I am the Druid Keeper of the Stones. My name's Terry. We were the philosophers of the Celtic peoples. We were there to try and answer the unanswerable questions. Try and research things like stars in the sky and the waxings and wanings of the moon and eclipses.
Modern Druids get their inspiration from Greek and Roman writers who tell us that the ancient Druids were powerful leaders who worshipped in oak groves and cut down mistletoe with golden sickles. But these classical sources also tell us something the modern Druid would rather forget. That the ancient Druids conducted savage religious rituals, including human sacrifice. Was this just Roman propaganda, or did it really happen? The answer may lie here, on the outskirts of Manchester. Lindo Common is a Cheshire peat bog and the site of an ancient crime scene. In 1984, a man's remains were found preserved in the peat. No one knew how long the body had lain there. Police forensics revealed that he died between AD 50 and AD 100. It was clear he'd been brutally murdered, but it was the nature of his injuries that made archaeologists consider the role of Druids and the existence of ritual sacrifice in Iron Age Britain.
This is Lindo Man, who is perhaps the best piece of evidence we have for ritual killing in the Iron Age.
So what makes you think he was ritually sacrificed rather than just murdered?
Well, this unfortunate man was found in the middle of a bog. The circumstances of his death, I think, provide proof that this is more than simply an unfortunate murder victim. He's found in a pond of water. He's naked except for a band of fox fur around his arm. And he's killed by firstly hitting him on the head with a blunt instrument, and you can still see this terrible wound today. He has around his throat a garrote. Now, whether that's to strangle him or to break his neck, because his neck is broken, his throat is cut, and it appears he's allowed to bleed. And then, if that hasn't actually killed him, he's placed face down in a pool of water.
That's what you call overkill.
I think this is it. This is definitely overkill. He's in water, and we know so much from the rest of Iron Age Europe that water is a special place for putting offerings to the gods at this time. So it adds to this evidence of him being a ritual killing.
It was the contents of Lindo Man's stomach that could give clues to his identity. It contained mistletoe pollen mixed with grain.
We know from one of the ancient writings that the mistletoe was supposed to be sacred to the Druids, and certainly since that mistletoe pollen was found in his stomach, people have always wanted to associate him with the Druids.
He was sacrificed just as the Romans were invading Britain. Is this how Britain's Celtic people reacted to invasion, with local Druids desperately trying to get help from the gods?
imagine you're being conquered by the Roman army. This may well be exactly the time when you're trying to ask the gods, pleading for help against the invaders, perhaps.
Is it possible that he was a druid?
That's a possibility. Certainly, when you look at his fingernails, for example, this was a person who did no hard labour before he died.
Now, to us, the human sacrifice is, in a way, the ultimate sacrifice, but do you think it was like that for them as well?
It's very difficult to say. I would say yes, that human sacrifice is an extraordinary step to take, but it's clearly a step which is fairly often taken in Iron Age Britain.
The sacrifice of Lindau Man may confirm the Romans' description of the Druids as barbaric, but we also know from the same writings that many British Druids were slaughtered when they tried to fight back the invaders. But other Druids adopted a different strategy to deal with the Roman invasion. Colchester was the largest town in Britain at the time of the Roman conquest, and home to a British tribe called the Catavaloni. I've come to the unlikely setting of a nearby sand quarry to uncover startling new evidence of the relationship of local Celts to the Romans. The clues are in the grave of a man who may also have been a druid, not a killer, but a herbal doctor and healer. The year is 50 AD, 7 years after the Romans invaded Britain. At a place called Stanway outside Colchester, a solemn ritual is taking place. A high-ranking member of the local Catavaloni tribe is being buried. Buried along with his cremated remains was an extraordinary selection of grave goods. This remarkable collection tells us a lot about the love affair of one ancient Celt with the glamorous culture of the Romans.
He was plainly wealthy. He probably spoke Latin. We can also tell that he was very Romanized, though, and lived a Roman way of life. He ate meals in a Roman way, with cups, plates, and bowls, imported from Gaul.
But he was basically a Celt.
He was probably Briton. It is an outside possibility, I imagine. He may have come from Gaul. This sustainable, for example, is not Roman. This is not the sort of thing you'll find around the Mediterranean, but you'll find it in Northern Europe and in Britain. So this is his own thing, his own British thing.
Traces of Artemisia found in this strainer bowl are evidence of herbal medicine, an important part of Druid lore.
Oh, it's getting hot.
Okay, you better put it down and let it brew. So what do all these things in the grave tell us as a whole?
First of all, they tell us that the dead person was a doctor, a healer. We can be pretty sure about that because of the surgical instruments. This is the only authenticated set of surgical instruments known from Britain.
This remarkable set of medical instruments are not Roman, but British. With them, it would have been possible to perform bone surgery and even eye operations. But this man was much more than just a doctor.
He probably also was a diviner, and we can tell that from the rods.
Rods, what are these for?
Well, there was 8 of those. We think it's very likely they were used for divination. It's a kind of, not quite fortune telling, but it's that sort of idea, like you might read tea leaves in a cup.
Do you think it's possible this could be the burial of a druid?
It is possible he was a druid, yes, but we can't tell if he was. We can tell that he practiced medicine, and we can tell that he communicated with the gods. That's what those roads were for. But we can't go as far as to say he was a druid, no. Could have been.
The grave of the Dr. Druid of Colchester tells me a lot about the history of the British Celts. They weren't all pushed to the margins by the Romans. Most probably remained exactly where they were and became Romanized.
I'm not drinking all this, by the way. That's
It'll do you good.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh dear.
But the Druids weren't the only group of Celts to become the stuff of legend. The Romans had wiped out the Celtic world in Europe, and most of Britain became part of their empire. But there was one place that was never conquered. So hostile were the Celtic tribes of Scotland that the Romans built not one, but 2 walls to keep them at bay. The Romans called their mysterious and warlike enemies the Picts, a nickname that just means the painted people.
Hi there.
You're here to find out about the Picts.
That's exactly what I'm here for. So they were called the painted people by the Romans. Why was that?
We had a great love of painting our body, decorating our body. As you can see with Jim, he's doing a good job there.
Painted our bodies and the things we hunted, the stags and the salmon and the knotwork. This is Pictish knotwork. There is a difference. I couldn't tell you what the difference is, but there is a difference.
So decoration, although it's got a practical value, it's maybe got some heraldic value to your clan or your tribe.
Like other Celtic tribes, the Picts didn't write things down. Instead, they painted symbols on their bodies.
This is the surface of the earth, and that's the surface of the sky, the limit of the sky. That's all the power. These are divining rods. It's in between the earth and the sky. But traditionally, the Pictish warrior was naked.
Must have been pretty scary.
The Picts were never a distinct ethnic group. They were a collection of British tribes. Just like the Gauls, they had come together to fight the Romans.
So you ready for this fighting formation?
Yeah, show me about it, yeah.
We're going to position you in the front line of this formation. Hope you don't mind.
I'll be the first to go, will I?
No, you'll be fighting well. We'll keep an eye on you.
While you're advancing forward, I'll be protecting you. The chances are we are related, which makes me watch your back a hell of a lot.
Aiming at feet and at faces. And if you've got the skill, up under and throats.
So if you're busy doing the business, I can come over and back people, protect you also.
This is a fighting system that's survived thousands of years.
So it must have worked.
It worked.
The skillful Celtic warriors the Romans called Picts were legendary. They were never defeated on their own soil by the Roman legions.
So what cries are Blair?
One for the relative. Step forward. Hello, Blair!
The Picts were warriors, but there was another side to them that the Romans never mentioned. It's a dramatic Pictish legacy that can still be seen today. Scores of ornately carved symbol stones mark the landscape of northeast Scotland. They are finely carved with animals, but also abstract symbols, the meaning of which remains a mystery to this day. Any tribe who could carve these complex and beautiful stones were clearly not the savage barbarians that the Romans would have us believe. But by the 6th century, 200 years after the Romans withdrew, the Picts were getting a new reputation. I've come to Tarbert on the northeast coast of Scotland to visit an astonishing archaeological site, a large Christian and Pictish monastery.
Come and see our latest discovery, Richard. There, this is what we've just found. Wow. A Celt. This is a Celt belonging to our Celtic monastery.
Now, you say a Celt, but I understand this area has something to do with another people called the Picts.
The Picts, yes, we're in Pictish heartland. A Pict is simply a Briton who was living in Scotland, the east part of Scotland that is, at that time, and the Romans gave them the nickname Pict. like painty, because they were tattooed.
He's a Pict, a Briton and a Celt. There are many levels to his identity. In the same way, I'm a Londoner, a Southerner, a Briton and European. Yet another level to his identity was his newfound faith as a Christian.
This is the ruin of our Celtic monastery. Church, burial ground, large stone monuments there. Here, workshops. Workshops either side of a road, and then mill, farm. So it's like a little town.
Many of Britain's pagan tribes adopted the new religion with enthusiasm. Pictish carving skills were now turned to express the Christian message.
That's come off a monument which has pictured a Celtic visionary. And look at those eyes. This person has seen beyond the present world. And the way that they represent that with those eyes is magical, I think. Absolutely amazing.
Tarbert was much more than just a place of prayer and devotion, for these are the tools to make Christian manuscripts.
What's that then? Now this is our greatest find to date. It doesn't look much, does it? It's a little pebble, and you see it's covered in paint. You see spots one side, and the other side a little cross. There's something the Picts had. Maybe they're amuletic, something like a little charm, keep in your pocket, your lucky pebble. But we've also found last week a small stylus, a bone stylus, which means that here people were being trained to write. So that's the end of the illiterate Picts, and we know that the Picts were writing and producing gospel books here in the northeast part of Scotland, round about the 7th or 8th century.
Pictish artists would inscribe their new faith with quill and chisel. Their remarkable standing stones would now combine a pagan heritage with Christian symbolism.
We see here a very advanced monastic community in the heart of Pictland, bringing with it beliefs which have been generated ultimately in Ireland from literature created in Greece and in Rome. You know, what a mixture. You know, these aren't barbarians, these are very well-read people. They're superlative artists, they're clearly intellectuals, but these are people of the highest civilization.
The greatest legacy the Picts have left us are their mysterious standing stones.
Hi, Barry.
Many have suffered from hundreds of years of Scottish weather. Now I want to see what they would have looked like, fresh from the stonemason's hands. Sculptor Barry Grove has spent 4 years carving the first Pictish stone in over 1,200 years. This is a recreation of a monument which stood here in the 8th century. What can their stones tell us about Pictish culture?
The things you can easily say is that they knew a lot about symbolic language. They have no trouble not only imagining a vine scroll, but executing one perfectly. And then they have their own symbols done in beautiful Celtic artwork. And these are what distinguishes Pictish sculpture from all other sculpture, the symbols. And then this picture, which has got so much realism in, as usual, beautifully done by the Picts. It stood in the landscape, it was a memorial, but it's also a picture on their world and a picture on the next world.
The Picts, once classed as painted savages, were far from that. In fact, they were highly skilled and intelligent, and they embraced an imported faith. Where did this Christianity come from? There are clues in the landscape of settlers coming from across the Irish Sea. These 5th century stones are not Pictish. Found in western Scotland and Wales, they are carved with a simple script called Ogham, the first evidence of Celtic writing. The people who carved these stones had been raiding and settling in Britain for hundreds of years. The Romans called them Scotti, they would give both their Roman nickname and their Gaelic language to Scotland. We know them as the Irish. These Celtic raiders were the Christian warriors who converted the Picts. I followed the story of the pagan Celts. Now I want to find out why and how the Celts of Ireland became Christians. Their new faith may have reached Ireland across the seas from Roman Gaul as early as the late 4th century AD. So I've come to the west coast of Ireland to meet someone who can show me the influence the seaways had on the Celtic world, and to discover how the new religion reached these shores.
Walter Rose, Richard. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to go out there on the ocean for a while and
Fantastic.
have an experience of Celtic navigation.
Sounds terrific.
2,000 years or 3,000 years or something like that. So.
Made of hazel rods and cowhide, the Curragh has been sailing the waters off Ireland for millennia.
Would you say it's a specifically Celtic style of boat?
That's what I think, yeah. It has survived then really only in Wales and in Ireland, like at the extremities of the Celtic movement really, so that kind of helps the idea that it is very much a Celtic boat.
The Celts of the British Isles were masters of the sea,
Give it a bit of muscle, Richard.
and far from being isolated from the outside world, people and ideas flowed back and forth.
If you can work the oars, you're almost immune to the weather. It'll come in and out through surf. It feels really safe, and it feels safe in big seas.
Celtic missionaries carried the gospel in these fragile boats. They could easily have sailed as far as Brittany, Spain, and the Mediterranean.
The sea was the highway, so we see it as a barrier. My picture of the Celts is that you got to places from the shore to the shore.
And what about Celtic Christianity? How do you see that as different?
Celtic Christianity is supposed to have come here through the Mediterranean, so you had a line from Egypt that brought Christianity to Ireland through sea routes, and this developed with a very strong connection with nature.
So really the boat in Celtic society was used for everything from spreading the gospel to going fishing, really.
Yeah, and in particular on pilgrimage. The early Christian Egyptians went to the desert to find God. The tradition in the Gaelic and Celtic tradition is you go on the ocean. That's the desert. That's where you go.
In the 6th century, the Irish Celts, inspired by these early Christian fathers, settled for the watery deserts of the ocean and the bleakest islands off their coast. I'm sailing 8 miles out into the North Atlantic off the far west coast of Ireland. I'm looking to find a place that perfectly sums up the unique spirit of what became Celtic Christianity. When the first Irish monks sailed to the island of Skellig Michael, they knew they had found their desert. It's a rocky crag, soaring vertically 700 feet out of the Atlantic Ocean. This is a truly awesome stairway to heaven. Built in 600 AD, the tiny monastery of Skellig Michael clings like a limpet to the rock. These beehive huts were home to a sacred community of Irish monks who, like their Druidic ancestors, worshipped in the wilderness.
Why did they choose this place? I mean, it is a bit out of the way.
It seems that at the time people were seeking to live in isolated places and to live monastic lives which were quite similar to those lived by the Desert Fathers in Egypt.
So this was, in a way, their desert.
Absolutely. They may have felt that they were bringing the influence of Christ to the very edge of the world at the time.
Just to survive here was an art in itself.
Here we have what was probably the community cell, the place where the monks cooked and ate.
These Celtic monks were resourceful. Contemplation of the spiritual didn't mean they could overlook the bare necessities.
And here we have the most important and practical building for the monks. This is the necessarium. Which
The necessarium? What's that?
Basically, it's the monk's toilet. And of course, they may have been even more practical because this is one corner where there'd be almost no updraft.
What makes this early Irish tradition unique is that it draws together the Christian message and the pagan legacy of druid and warrior. The battle was not against a tribal enemy, but the spiritual enemy within, who could be defeated by extreme feats of endurance.
So how did it work? The monks were on the mainland, they saw this island, they thought that would be a hard and difficult place to live. Is that what it was all about, really?
Well, no, there may have been a little bit more romance and enthusiasm to it than that. Certainly, there was a penitential aspect to it. Of course, it's also interesting that pre-Christian druids did also go to solitary places, so there may be echoes of that as well.
So are you saying you think there might be an actual continuity between druids going into the wilderness and some of the early Irish monks doing the same by coming to places like this?
The echoes are definitely there.
The Druids had no written language, but they may well have spoken Latin and Greek. Now their Christian descendants would copy and so preserve ancient texts and the Bible that might otherwise have been lost with the fall of Rome. Travelling the high seas in their curraghs, Irish missionaries brought their Celtic version of Christianity to northwest Europe. In the year 563, St. Columba set himself adrift from his native island, in a boat with neither oars nor sails. He left his destination to the whim of the sea and to the will of his God, and the place that he landed was to become a powerhouse of Celtic Christianity, the island of Iona. Iona was a sacred place even in pagan times. Before the time of St. Columba, there was a school of Druids on the island. I've come to Iona, a cultural crossroads of the British Isles, because it was here where the most enduring icon of the Celtic world was created. The Book of Kells is a manuscript of Christian Gospels, which features page after page of lavish illumination and decoration. It's probably the most stunning expression of what we call Celtic art. But for me, it's more than that. It contains within its pages a coming together of many traditions: pagan, Pictish, Christian, Irish, Scottish. All these different flavours of Celticness can be found here. I mean, the amount of technical skill this book must have taken is incredible. And do we know who actually wrote the book?
No, we don't. Books of this period seldom say who, where, when. Here you've got a team of at least 8 artists and scribes, possibly even as many as 12, actually taking their turns at the benches in the scriptorium, all doing their bit to create something which was probably intended to celebrate the founder, Saint Columba.
Weaving around the Latin text are layer upon layer of images, full of symbolism and hidden meanings, drawn from many different cultures.
When you look at the mixture of ornament and symbols that you've got in the Book of Kells, you can begin to see an incredibly complex world coming alive. It's a very, very beautiful symbol. You've got the Chi-Rho, which are the first letters of the word Christ in Greek, the X and the P. So you've got immediately a Greek symbol which explodes across the page, and it's become almost an icon in its own right. So when you look into the arms of the X, for example, you've got all of this incredible spiral work that goes right back to Latin and to the Iron Age ornament that we associate traditionally with Celtic culture.
Some of these motifs were already 1,000 years old when inscribed into this manuscript.
And then you've got all sorts of other symbols layered in here too. For example, you've got a little human head at the end of the row. And this is the passage where it's talking about the birth of Christ. So it's when Christ becomes human. So you've got the human coming in there. So time and time again you can penetrate this mystery. And it's a bit like the kids' game of Where's Wally?
You'll never find Wally in here though, but I did find something else. Could this be a pagan Pict?
It's hard to imagine that Picts would still have been personally tattooed or painted by around 800. So this again is a recollection back to their history as a people.
What role do you think the book has to play in modern Ireland?
Well, obviously it's become, if you like, the big symbol of Celticness, Irishness. Some people are very, very shocked when you suggest that the book wasn't actually made on Irish soil, that it was likely to have been made off of the coast of Scotland on the little island of Iona.
The Book of Kells is an icon of Celtic art. People think it's purely Irish, but its influences actually come from all over Europe.
I think some of the symbols that people think of as Celtic in it actually are misunderstood. For example, the Celtic knot that again you see on table mats, scarves, sweaters, everything, isn't actually a Celtic design. It's something that goes back to the Germanic world and to its relationship with the Roman army. But really it's after all of the different peoples of Britain and Ireland have pooled their designs and their experiences that you get these things growing out. And then of course they're appropriated as Celtic.
The Book of Kells is not a simple icon of Irish Celtic identity. In this manuscript are the cultural fingerprints of Picts, Britons, Irish, Scots and Anglo-Saxons too. It was upon these diverse traditions that Celtic Christianity was built.
Well, the peoples we think of as Celtic never ever do things by halves. It's always with passion and you throw yourself into it. And there was a lot about previous pagan religion, I think, that lends itself well and maps onto Christianity. The idea of water as a source of life and of rebirth would lead straight to the idea of baptism, for example. The idea of heroes who would sacrifice everything on behalf of their people is something that appealed very much to both the gods and the warriors of pagan mythology. It's something that I think would have been often almost effortless as a transition, and you can imagine many Druids converting almost overnight and becoming monastic founders or members of communities.
There's so many connections between paganism and Christianity that it's not really surprising that Ireland's Celtic icon is a cross. Christianity was a smooth transition rather than a break with the past. The descendants of the ancient Druids, the Irish monks, laboured in isolated monasteries transcribing manuscripts by hand. The Celtic world, long reviled by the Greeks and Romans, preserved the knowledge of the classical world and exported it back to Europe with Christian missionaries. The Celtic would be the link between the Dark Ages and the later medieval world that succeeded it. I'm now back in Dublin, having travelled 4,000 miles across the ancient Celtic world. Today, Ireland proudly presents itself as a firmly Celtic country that still speaks a Celtic language. Ireland has to be the place to confront the final question. What makes someone a Celt? Is it their culture, their language, or their blood? And where better to find the answer than Dublin, home to some of the greatest treasures of the Celtic world. The legacy of a culture that spans over 2,000 years.
So I've never seen anything like this boat before. It really is special, isn't it?
It's a very, very special one. This really is an exquisitely made piece. You can see all the fittings of the boat, the oars and the masts.
So would you say it was made by a Celt?
Well, it was made by a goldsmith working in Ireland. Whether you would call them Celts or not, they certainly wouldn't have called themselves Celts.
So why is Ireland seen as a Celtic country?
Being Celtic is a good marketing ploy, I think. There is an interest in the Celt and things Celtic, and I think Irish people cleverly capitalise on that.
Do you say that the Celtic identity is elusive, or is it just an illusion?
I think it's largely an illusion.
So if the Irish aren't Celtic, what are they?
Well, Irish is what we have called ourselves for a very long time.
No reason to change there then?
I don't think so, no. Well, maybe European is the next big label that we'll all be embracing.
Lots of people will be shocked to hear that the Irish aren't Celts at all. And if the Irish aren't Celts, what about the Scots and the Welsh? What the archaeology has shown me is that Celticness is about culture, not race. But people still cling on to the idea that they have Celtic genes. I want to nail this down once and for all. If archaeology and language alone can't provide the answers, then maybe DNA can.
We find Ireland interesting because we're Irish, we work here, everybody wants to know something about their origins, about the past.
Dan Bradley and his team have collected DNA from all over Europe. They were searching for evidence of a genetic link across the Celtic world to see if people migrated from the continent to Britain and Ireland. The results were surprising.
What we have here is if you like, a weather map of the genetics of Europe. And if you look at the contour that Ireland gives a signal of, it seems to share a similarity along the Atlantic facade. What it doesn't do is show any particular affinity, it just shows difference moving towards Central Europe.
Your genetic evidence seems to sit very well with the Celtic languages, but it doesn't seem to sit well with this idea of this great migration.
Yes.
But really you're saying the Irish have always been here?
As of the Welsh and the Scottish, I think it's very credible that the population of this island hasn't changed that much since the start of farming 6,000 years ago.
There's no genetic evidence that there was once a Celtic race, an ethnic basis to the shared culture we call Celtic. And yet there is a common language link with Europe. So the Celtic languages must be much older than the Iron Age Celtic culture by thousands of years, long before the Greeks ever coined the word Celt. Who were the Celts? One thing I can say for certain, they weren't a race of Iron Age immigrants. And there never was a European Celtic empire or one ethnic group who called themselves Celts. The word Celt conveniently labels many of the tribes of Europe, but it obscures the brilliant diversity of Iron Age peoples. The modern Celt is more of a myth than reality, but there is a real sense of Celtic identity in Scotland, Wales and Ireland. What does it mean to be Celtic today? If in Ireland they claim that they are Irish first and European second, well, you can't get more Celtic than that.
We hope you've enjoyed The Celts. Tomorrow night, join us for the return of our wartime detective with an intriguing murder mystery on a lonely beach to solve. Michael Kitchen stars in Foyle's War, 8:35 tomorrow night on ABC.